Hey everyone, this is lecture 5.1, and in this lecture we're talking about groups. So we're going to talk about what exactly is a group dynamics, and then influence on the individual. A group is a collection of people who share some attribute, identify with one another, and interact with each other. This is one of those super base definitions in sociology that we all know what it is, we just have to define it so that we can continue to talk about it in greater detail toward greater complexity. Groups provide us with values, norms, and rules that guide our lives, and sociologists have identified many different types of groups. We talked about values and norms in previous lectures. Now we're going to talk about how groups shape those things. There are a number of broad categories of groups. First, let's talk about primary groups and secondary groups. In primary groups, we usually involve more face-to-face interactions, greater cooperation, and deeper feelings of belonging. These groups are ones in which we feel very closely tied to other members of the groups. These are the people that you say, well, I would put myself in harm's way for that person. That's a primary group, is what that is. A secondary group then is organized around a specific activity or the accomplishment of a task. So examples of secondary groups include school, work, it could be a religious organization, it could be a sports team. Your goal in a secondary group is to do a thing. Really the goal in a primary group could be said to be like love or friendship, right? Which isn't a specific thing. That's the difference between primary groups and secondary groups. It should be noted that primary groups could become secondary groups and vice versa. It's more common, though, for secondary groups to become primary groups. So let's say you meet somebody, you meet a group of people in a class, and then those group of people become close friends. That's an example of a transition from a secondary group into a primary group. The next ideas are that of in-group and out-group. So an in-group is a group that a person identifies with and feels loyalty toward. So this is the group that I am a member of. This is us. That's the in-group. The out-group then is a group that you feel opposition or rivalry or hostility toward. They are them. They are the opposition. They are the competition. They are the enemy. That is the out-group. In-groups and out-groups may occur on the micro level or the macro level. If the United States is at war with another country, and we're in the United States, our in-group is the United States, and that other country we're at war with is the out-group on the macro level. If you are fighting with your family's fighting with another family across the street, your family would be in the in-group, and the other family would be the out-group. And it should be pointed out that in-groups and out-groups can be primary groups or secondary groups as well. That should be pointed out. You can have a primary in-group, a primary out-group, a secondary in-group, or a secondary out-group as well. Those can be mixed and matched. Now let's talk about some specific group categories. Let's talk about crowds. A crowd is simply a temporary gathering of people in a place whose members may interact but do not identify with each other and will not remain in contact. So these are people at a bus stop at 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. They don't have anything in common with each other other than they want to go in a direction on the bus. These are people in a movie theater. They don't have anything in common with each other other than they want to see a movie. Some people might not even want to see that movie. They just want to see a movie. That's a crowd. A social network, then, is a web of direct and indirect ties connecting an individual to other people. So you, your family, your friends, your peers, your colleagues, your teachers, your co-workers, all of these constitute your social network. So things like Facebook, Instagram, other social media, those are social networks, but this phenomena has always existed as long as we have been this type of human being. So at least 500,000 years, right? We've been doing social network stuff. Online networks, though, are merely an extension of those original, purely human interaction social networks without the tech element. Now we're going to talk about what is a group, and I see there's a slight slide issue here. This is an example of a social network, and this should have been a few slides ago. So in taking your brain back to social network, this dot right here is you, an individual. So this one, starting on the far left, that could be you. You see that you are connected to two other people, and those two other people know each other. One person knows one person further on to the right. The other knows another person, but those two people do not know each other, but they both know a third person. Then one person knows another person knows another person, and then on the farthest right there is a social network of three people that know each other. And in this way, the person on the far left could be you, but the person on the far right could be like a heroin dealer in Bangladesh, right? You don't know these people, even if though maybe you are connected to all kinds of people. That is the nature of a social network. Our social networks can be huge and expanding across in ways that we can't even perceive. That's the nature of the thing, and you really see that if you look into social media, where you click on your friends, and then you click on friends of your friends that you don't know, and then if you do that a couple stages, you find some people that you probably never would interact with. That's a good example of how social networks work. Okay, now let's talk a bit about group dynamics. So group dynamics are the patterns of interaction between groups and individuals. So this is how groups operate, this is how groups behave. Group dynamics can include the way groups form and fall apart. It can also include how groups influence members of the individual group. The size of the group can absolutely dictate the nature of the group. In doing that, as group sizes increase, intensity of relationships decrease. Thus, while overall and at the same time, overall stability increases. So the bigger a group gets, the more stable it gets, but the bigger a group gets, the less connected we are with each individual person. Additionally, exclusivity occurs as members limit interaction to within the group. So if in the group you're talking about your workplace, or you're talking about people on your floor in a dorm, as the nature of the relationships continue and develop, you develop some good friends within that group. That is exclusivity. You form little cliques within the group. That's what that is. As I mentioned, the size of the group dictates the nature of the group. Cliques often form around social characteristics such as age, gender, class, race, or ethnicity. We humans tend to lump together with other people who are similar to ourselves. In day-to-day language, we call this people we have things in common with, people we want to be friends with, right? Well, it's often because we have similar characteristics to those people, because that's an easy bonding element. Social closure then occurs when groups start to exclude others or certain undesirables from participating or enjoying resources. That could simply be something like, well, I'm calling a bunch of friends to go to a movie, but I'm not calling everybody I possibly know, right? It can be not a mean thing, just like, these are the people I want to hang out with tonight. That's a form of social closure. but it absolutely can be like some mean girl behavior too, right? That like we all experienced when we were in middle school, where one person decides that you're not good enough to be in the group anymore, and then they don't call you. So yeah, it can be unpleasant too, or it can just also be entirely innocent. You can't invite every person you've ever met to your wedding. That is also an element of social closure. Now we're talking about specific sizes of groups. A dyad is the smallest possible social group. It has 2 members. It is unstable because of its small size. There are 2 members to a dyad. If one person leaves the group, it ceases to exist. There's 2 people. One person leaves, it doesn't exist anymore. A dyad, however, leads to almost inherently, but not necessarily, intense, strong relationships, right? Romantic relationships are what most of us think of in this regard. Most people seek out 2-person romantic relationships, and those 2-person relationships tend to be much more emotionally intense. Now, given some people do have maybe 3-person romantic relationships or 4-person romantic relationships, and those can be intense emotional relationships, but a bit more social energy has to be put in to a social relationship every time you add another person. And we'll see that in the following slide. A triad then is a 3-person group. It is more stable than a dyad, but like I said, you have to put more energy into those social relationships if you want them to be super intense. Additionally, though, it is more stable because if there's 2 elements here. If one person leaves the group, then it just turns into a dyad and you still have your group. But then additionally, if 2 people in the group are fighting, the 3rd person can act as an intermediary and then be able to really fix things, right? You don't have that element when you're talking about a dyad. And then groups get more complex. So you see between the dyad and the triad, there is 1 relationship in a dyad. There are 3 relationships in a triad. Each relationship requires more energy. And then additionally, let's say in the triad, if you are A and you have a relationship with B and C, not only do you have to keep track of your relationship with B and your relationship with C, but you also have to keep track of the relationship between B and C. That's more social energy. In a group of 4, then, there are 6 relationships, and there's more to keep track of. So you're A, you keep track of your relationship with B, C, and D, but then also you have to keep track of the relationship between B and D, C and D, B and C, right? And then we see with group of 5, it gets bigger, 6, 7, bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And us humans really are carrying capacity even in basic conversations. We can only really have a super dynamic conversation with other people, typically in about groups of 5. That's about our carrying capacity in human conversations. There are certainly exceptions to that rule, but really anytime you have a conversation, an active conversation group of more than 5 in a given social setting, often one person becomes like the storyteller or the leader or the instructor or whatever, and the other people become more passive. Or the group breaks up into smaller chunks, so 5 people or 7 people might be standing in a circle, but really we have a group of 3 people talking to each other, a group of 2 people talking to each other, and then some other maybe social interaction. So yeah, the bigger a group gets, the more complex it gets. Another element to group dynamics are alliances or coalitions. This is a closely related concept to a clique, but it can be slightly different. These are subgroups that form between group members. So these can allow subgroup members to start to dominate the group in their own interests. So this can be kind of an innocent social clique type situation where it is purely these are the people I want to hang out with. Or it absolutely can take on that sort of reality TV element of, I want to control this work situation. You and me here, we can work together. We're going to stick together, and then we're going to get what we want in our workplace or our political group or whatever. Now that obviously then, when certain people start working with each other and excluding other people, then that can create a destabilizing element within the broader group as a whole, right? So these 2 or 3 or 4 people, they're all working together toward their self-interests, but they stop working as much together with other people in, let's say, the workplace. That can help those people, but then it makes the bigger group there, it destabilizes it. It creates teams within the team, and that can have less than beneficial results if you're thinking about the whole group as a whole. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how groups influence individuals. So this element called social influence, often called peer pressure, is the influence of one's fellow group member on their individual attitudes and behavior. So when you were in high school, I am sure you had many guidance counselors or teachers or whatever talking about how terrible peer pressure is. The reality of the matter is that peer pressure exists in most human social relationships. It exists among all different categories of age groups, whatever, and it is not inherently a bad thing. If your friends want to study before school, and cause you to study, that's a form of peer pressure. But if your friends want to get super drunk and drive drunk, that also is peer pressure, right? It is a neutral phenomena. It just depends on how it actually goes down. Generally, we humans conform to group norms because we want to gain acceptance and approval. So we want people to like us. We call those positive sanctions. We'll talk about that more later in the course. And we want to avoid rejection and disapproval. We want to avoid negative sanctions. We don't want people to dislike us, right? That's why we go along with the group, especially if we have a good relationship, a harmonious relationship, a non-toxic relationship with the group. We do these things because it sucks to have people not like us, right? Now let's talk about some stages of conformity as relating to group dynamics. So, there are 3 stages to conformity. Put it in a different way, there are 3 levels of intensity with which you will follow what the group says and the rules of the group. They are compliance, identification, and internalization. Compliance is the mildest form of conformity. In the compliance stage, we take actions so that we can be rewarded or avoid punishment. So let's say you're working at a pizza place and you really don't care anything about this job, but you want to continue to be paid and you don't want to be fired, or you don't want to get yelled at, right? That is the compliance stage. You don't care about any of the people you're working at. You don't really care much about the job aside from getting paid. Compliance. Then the next level up is identification. So you conform to maintain a relationship with a person or a group. So, you know what? I like these people at the pizza place. I identify with them. So I'm going to show up on time because it makes it harder for my fellow workers if I don't show up on time. Or my boss is a good guy. It makes it harder for him if I don't show up on time. Both of those are in the identification phase. And then the internalization phase. This is the strongest type of conformity, in which an individual adopts the beliefs or actions of a group and makes them his or her own. So I follow the rules at the pizza place because I think they are good rules. I think they are fair rules, and if everyone doesn't follow the rules, it doesn't work. That is you believing in the system itself, and if you achieve that, or if it happens to you, then that is the strongest level there. Now, in terms of workplaces or social groups or whatever, there is some research to show that those individuals who have a say in in the rules of the workplace or the group or whatever, those people are more likely to internalize, right? Because they had a part to play in forming those rules themselves. That's an interesting element. This is an argument that maybe workplaces should involve workers in making up the rules to a certain degree, and if that is genuine and if that works, then people may be more likely to actually follow the rules. Additionally, then, this is why you see people who are in management or maybe at the top of the organization, they have a deeper sense of internalization because maybe they made the rules themselves and they think they're good rules because they made them. That's also internalization. Now let's talk about this element called social loafing. A group almost always outperforms an individual, but rarely performs as well as it could in theory, right? So if you have a pile of bricks that you have to move 100 feet to put them in a shed or something, right? If you are doing that job by yourself, probably, at least if you're motivated to, probably you're going to work as hard as you possibly can, right? One person doing a job is usually relatively efficient. But the more people you add to a job, it becomes less and less efficient, right? The reason for that is that as size increases, social loafing increases. What are the reasons for this? Well, first of all, we make up these justifications. It's a matter of human perception. If you have 100 people moving 500 bricks, maybe someone gets there and there's just a bunch of people in the way and they say, well, there's nothing for me to do, right? Or someone else could come maybe a couple minutes late and say, well, they have this under control. But also, there are certain people in this world that are just kind of lazy too, and sometimes a lazy person will try to take advantage of that situation. Personally, I don't really believe that most of us are lazy. It's a matter of personal philosophy. I think most of us are actually probably hard workers when we're motivated to do so. But, you know, there are a few lazy people in the world. Additionally, then, with social loafing, as size increases, a greater degree of organization is needed as well, right? So you need to take people out of the group then to be able to tell people where they need to be in the process of the job. And then as you take people out of the pool to manage everyone else, then that also, you know, takes that person away from the pool of people that could be actually doing work itself. So there are layers of this phenomena of as a group grows, inefficiency increases. And then finally for this lecture, it should be pointed out that group leaders can increase efficiency by recognizing individual effort or by increasing members' social identity. So if I say to you, look, Jerry, you're doing a great job. I love what you're doing. That will cause Jerry to work better, and it'll also cause the other people who are by Jerry to say, hey, I want to be told I'm doing a good job. But then also, if people say, hey, Jerry, you're terrible, and if you don't get better, you're going to get fired, that can make Jerry work harder. It can also make other people work harder as well. So it can really go both ways there. But then also, if people in the group develop social identity, they develop a degree of identity with the group, and we see this in high school sports teams. We see this in military units. Sometimes we see this in workplaces. If you believe that we are the Blue Devils, or we are Battalion 151, or whatever, then you will feel part of the group, that you have an intense obligation to the group, and that can actually cause efficiency to increase. Now, if it's done in an artificial way, if your boss just makes up, okay, you're team A, you're team B now, but the people don't really believe in the social identity, that can actually tank efficiency, but that's a different, it can backfire, is what I'm saying there. Okay, that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions at all, just let me know. Thanks.